So our first exam question states, describe the structure of ATP. It says, outline how named enzymes break down and resynthesize ATP. Now, this is a 4-mark question. So how would we answer this? First of all, describe the structure of ATP. Okay, now you could draw a label diagram like we've been doing. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw a label diagram. So we had a pentose sugar. We had the inorganic phosphates, and we had an adenine. Okay, now this is not enough. You will need to label it, okay, because they're looking for the names. Okay, so this is our pentose sugar, which is the ribose. Okay, these are our inorganic phosphates. And this is our adenine. Okay, and that's our nitrogenous base. So I've added in a bit more information that you would normally need, but I've just done that to explain the question. Okay, so we've described the structure of ATP. Okay, we need to outline how named enzymes break down and resynthesize ATP. So how is ATP broken down? Okay, well, ATP is broken down by reacting it with water into ADP plus an inorganic phosphate plus water, plus energy. Okay, now in this reaction, what's the enzyme which is used? Remember, this is a hydrolysis reaction. So we're going to say that it's a hydrolysis reaction. The enzyme which is used is ATP hydrolase because it's a hydrolysis reaction. That's the enzyme which is used. And finally, it says resynthesize of ATP. So how is ATP resynthesized? Well, ADP reacts with the inorganic phosphate and it produces ATP and water. Okay, so that's how it's produced. Okay, and remember that because water is being produced, this is a condensation reaction. Okay, this is a condensation reaction. And what's the enzyme that's being used to reform the ATP? We are synthesizing ATP. So the enzyme which is used is ATP synthase. Okay, and that's how I would answer this question. Okay, so we've looked at the structure of ATP, which we have drawn over here. We've named the enzymes, which we have, just a minute, over here, ATP hydrolase and ATP synthase. We've also named the reaction, which is, we've called it a hydrolysis and condensation reaction. And we've done it for both the synthesis of ATP and the breakdown of ATP. Okay, now if I show you the mark scheme for this question, okay, ribose, adenine, and 3 phosphates. So we've got ribose, we've got adenine, and we've got 3 inorganic phosphates. Okay, now it does say accept a label diagram showing ribose, adenine, and 3 phosphates. Okay, now it says label. That's why you need to label your diagram. ATP to ADP plus PI by ATP hydrolase in a hydrolysis reaction. We got all the parts of this answer, and then ADP to PI and PI to ATP by ATP synthase in a condensation reaction. So we've got all 4 points in this question. So we've got 4 marks. Okay, moving on. Now, you do get questions like this. In sort of exams, they normally give questions like this across sort of, if we say 3 papers of biology, in at least one paper, you will have a fill in the blank question. Okay, and that's what they've started to introduce in recent years. I think from 2023 onwards, they've started to introduce fill in the blank questions. Okay, at least once in every exam series. So these questions are questions which do come up and they're worth easy marks. Okay, so you don't want to be missing out on questions like these. The figure below shows an ATP synthase enzyme in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, so we've got the ATP synthase enzyme in the inner mitochondrial membrane. It says complete the passage with the appropriate terms. So we've got ATP synthase comprises several polypeptides. So it is said to have a what structure? Well, it comprises of several polypeptides. Okay, because it's polypeptides, we know that it's talking about proteins. Okay, now if it's talking about proteins, we know that the structures of proteins include the primary structure. We know that there is the secondary structure. We know that there is the tertiary structure. And we know that there is the quaternary structure. Okay, well, these are the four structures of a protein. Now it says that it has several polypeptide chains. Okay, if it has several polypeptide chain, remember tertiary structure is when it has one unique polypeptide chain, one unique 3D structure. However, it has several polypeptide chains. Okay, because it has several polypeptide chains, we know it's not going to be tertiary structure. Secondary doesn't have polypeptide chain, and primary just has a sequence of amino acids. So we know that our answer is going to be the quaternary structure. Okay, so we've got quaternary. It catalyzes the synthesis of an ATP molecule by what? Okay, so we've got ATP synthase. We're talking about ATP synthase. It catalyzes the synthesis of an ATP molecule by what? So how do we, what sort of reaction? Okay, by a something reaction. Okay, when we are synthesizing ATP, we talked about already on the previous slide that it's a condensation reaction. Okay, so we've got condensation. It says this involves the something of a water molecule. Okay, well, in a condensation reaction, what happens? A molecule of water is released in the process. So this involves the release of a water molecule. The ATP synthase in the figure above is in a mitochondrion, so would catalyze reactions during what? Okay, because it's in the mitochondria releases energy for what to take place? It releases energy for respiration to take place. Okay, so the answer to this would be respiration. Okay, and that's how I would answer this question. Okay, if we look at the mock scheme, quaternary, which we had condensation, we had release, and we have respiration. Okay, now it says aerobic over here, and I've written just respiration. Aerobic is in brackets. However, always try and include aerobic as well, because some mock schemes I've seen are very picky with the type of respiration. Okay, so I know I've not included it, but try and include it in your answers where possible. Aerobic respiration. Okay, and that would give us 2 marks. Okay, all correct, 2 marks. If you got 2 to 3 correct, that's 1 mark, and if you got 0 to 1 correct, that's 0 marks. Okay, another 4 mark question. This is our penultimate question. It says describe how an ATP molecule is formed from its component molecules. Okay, so what are the component molecules? Okay, there is adenine, there is ribose, and there are 3 inorganic phosphates. Okay, so we've got adenine. Okay, again, you could draw a label diagram here, but I'm not going to draw it. I'm going to write in words this time because I've also already drawn a label diagram. So we've got adenine, we've got ribose, and we have got 3 inorganic phosphates. Okay, 3 inorganic phosphates. And how is it formed? How is ATP formed? Well, what's the reaction? It's a condensation reaction. So it's a condensation reaction. Where is it formed from? It's formed from ADP and PI. Okay. In a condensation reaction to produce ATP plus water. And what enzyme? Always include the enzyme. This is catalyzed by ATP synthase. Okay. So it says 1 and 2, except for 2 marks, correct names of 3 components, adenine, ribose, 3 phosphate. So this was a very generous mark scheme and very generous in marking. Okay, because there were 2 marks for the components of the structure of ATP. There is 1 mark for the condensation reaction, and there is 1 mark for ATP synthase. Okay, so we've got all the marks there. We've named them, type of reaction. We've put the reaction in just to make sure that we have collected all our marks. And then ATP synthase, we've also named as that is the enzyme which catalyzes the reaction. Okay, so we've named all 4 points there. We've got 4 marks. Okay, this is our final exam question of the day. And this is a question behind the properties of ATP. Now, ATP is an energy source and it's used in many cell processes. Give 2 ways in which ATP is a suitable energy source for cells to use. Okay, so we've seen that ATP has many properties, and this is a question which is basically looking at the properties of ATP. It's basically asking you for how, okay, ATP is an energy source, it's given you that. How are we going to use ATP? What properties does it have in specific that allows it to become an energy source? And that's how we're going to answer. So remember the 2 PowerPoint slides that I went through and I listed 5 properties of ATP. This one is asking for 2. That's why I said learn 3 properties like really well at the top of your head, because in an exam question you're not going to have to list more than 3 properties of ATP. This question is only asking for 2. Okay, so we know that it says give 2 ways in which ATP is a suitable energy source for cells to use. Okay, now the first point that I'm going to say is that really ATP releases energy in small manageable amounts. Okay, and that's the first point that I had on the slide that I just spoke about. Okay, so ATP releases energy in small manageable amounts. Okay, that's my first point. Now, the next point is the one that's going to stick at the top of my head of phosphorylation. It phosphorylates other compounds, making them much more reactive. Okay, so ATP phosphorylates other compounds, making them much more reactive. Okay, so 2 points there. Now you could have said that it doesn't move out of cells, it stays within a cells to act as an immediate source of energy. That's another point that I would have said if it was 3 points, but these are the 2 points that I'm going for. Okay, and if I show you the mark scheme, I'm just going to get rid of my marking. Okay, so it says it releases relatively small amount of energy, little energy loss of these. So remember, we said small manageable amount of energy, which gives us our first mark. It says it releases energy instantaneously. So again, If you say that it's an immediate source of energy, that's basically covering the second point. It phosphorylates other compounds, making them more reactive. Remember, when we looked at the structure of ATP, we saw that ATP had an inorganic phosphate group, and when that is broken, that releases the energy for that ATP to be used, and then that phosphate that has broken off can go and combine with another compound, making it more reactive. Okay, it can be rapidly resynthesized. Okay, remember, when that phosphate group is released, it can have two options. It can either phosphorylate other compounds, or it can go on and combine with a different ATP molecule, and once it's done that, ATP is reformed by ATP synthase. Okay, it is not lost from, and it does not leave the cells. Okay, which is again on the lines that it can act as an immediate source of energy. Okay,